King Charles. Turns out he couldn't keep his promise for even 3 weeks. He had me fooled. And the result is he had to be slapped down by the British government, told to shut up with his global warming preaching. Now, 4 years ago, when he was still Prince, Charles was asked if he'd keep crusading on global warming as king, like he had as the Prince. He'd been cheering on global warming hysteric Greta Thunberg, driving to the Commonwealth Games opening ceremony in a car that runs on wine and cheese and not that awful, nasty petrol. And he was telling Scott Morrison publicly to turn up at that last big UN conference on global warming in Glasgow because, death and disaster.
I mean, what would you say to world leaders about why they should come to Glasgow?
Well, that's what I'm trying to say all the time. And the point being that this is a last chance saloon.
But Charles said, no, he'd stop that politicking as king. He said, I'm not that stupid. He said 4 years ago, I'm not that stupid. You can't do that as king because it's not an elected politician. It's an umpire, it's a symbol of unity. And as his first speech as king 3 weeks ago, he underlined that. He would step back.
My life will, of course, change as I take up my new responsibilities. It will no longer be possible for me to give so much of my time and energies to the charities and issues for which I care so deeply.
But the king just couldn't help himself. Yesterday, the Times reported he planned to give a speech at the United Nations next climate change conference in Egypt next month, until he was warned off by the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, telling him he couldn't go and play politics, forcing him to back down, but not without having a spokesman complain publicly, he was forced to, that he'd changed his plans entirely in the spirit of being ever mindful as king that he acts on government advice. Advice meaning he was ordered to stay home. And of course, how can Britain have a king in Egypt saying go harder on global warming while back home his Prime Minister is trying to wind back Britain's crazy global warming policies, which have left the country with a massive energy crisis and not enough reliable electricity and cheap enough for the poor to heat their homes in winter. Joining me from London is Brendan O'Neill, political editor of Spiked Online. Brendan, how on earth could this happen and what does it say?
It's really quite shocking. And the thing I would say is that we don't want a political king in this country. And I think Charles is in real danger of upsetting the constitutional arrangements in the UK and also of trashing his own mother's legacy. The Queen's legacy was that she had a perfectly observed neutrality. She didn't express her political opinions. She didn't give overtly political speeches. We don't know what she thought on most issues. That's the legacy of the Queen, how to be a monarch in the 20th and 21st centuries. And Charles is going to upend all of that if he insists on playing this hyper-political role of fear-mongering about climate change and insisting that we wind down our use of carbon. He might see that as just a simple moral mission, but the rest of us see it as very, very political and not something we want the king, or in my view, anyone else, pushing onto the agenda.
But of course it's political because his crusades, those and shared by other global warming alarms, come at a terrible cost. Tell us how bad your energy crisis is.
It's shocking. It's really bad. We are having a huge hike in energy costs, energy prices. The government is having to take pretty severe economic action to prevent people's household income from completely collapsing and businesses from collapsing as well. In my view, this is largely down to the green ideology of the past few decades, because one thing that has done it's been discouraging energy production. It's been discouraging the investment in nuclear power, the opening of coal-fired power stations. Generally, any form of domestic energy production has been frowned upon by green activists and green politicians. And in many cases, it's been shut down entirely, like our fracking industry, which Liz Truss now says she wants to get back into action. So if you close down energy production, if you demonize energy production as something evil and wicked and toxic, it is not at all surprising that you will end up in an energy crisis. So I pin a lot of the blame for what we're currently living through on the green ideologues who've had so much influence in public life over the past few years.
Yeah, but I wonder, Brendan, whether your Prime Minister is going to have the authority to push through with her plans to fight that, because I think she's lost a lot of her banked a lot of her credit already because Liz Truss, a week and a half ago, her government put out a big new budget with big tax cuts. The market then promptly tanked. Bank of England had to intervene, all that kind of stuff. Now the government has said, whoops, the tax cuts to the top rate, they are cancelled. We've listened. I mean, this is so embarrassing.
It's very embarrassing indeed. And there's already a split, it seems, between the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, and the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Kwasi Kwarteng. And they are backtracking. They are U-turning already, and they've only been in power a couple of weeks. It looks very, very bad. And it does look like they have capitulated to the noisy media, to institutions like the IMF, who interfered in our discussions last week about the economy. No one in this country ever voted for the IMF, so I don't know what business it is of theirs, what we do with our economy. And now it looks like the government has capitulated. So they've shown that they are weak, they do not stick by their agenda, and they are willing to turn. And it brings to mind Thatcher's famous line, "You turn if you want to, the lady's not for turning." It seems that doesn't apply to Liz Truss.
No, she was sold as the new Lady Thatcher. Lady Thatcher, she is not. Brendan O'Neill, thank you so much for your time.